Welcome back to the Convo Couch, my humans. I am Pasta Jardula.
And I'm Fiorella.
And Jonny Sue is still spinning on those ones and twos. So the question is, racism, capitalism, imperialism, elitism. All these isms, And as thousands rush into the street to protest the death of George Floyd, we see a movement based on social and racial justice. However, is this movement strong enough to bring about real systemic change without addressing the threat of imperialism? We got a lot of questions, so today we brought in a very special guest.
Yeah, you've all seen him take down the mainstream media, take down the neoliberals and the neocons. You've seen him on the campaign trail with Senator Bernie Sanders. He's also has a new podcast that you guys should check out called The Tightrope Podcast. It is our honor to introduce philosopher, activist, and intellectual Dr. Cornel West. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I want to salute both of you for being such forces for good. My dear brother Pasta, my dear sister Fiorella, and brother Sue doing his thing in the background.
You know, we need somebody on the ones and twos. He keeps it real.
Yep.
That's right.
Dr. West, thank you. I just want to send a special shout out to my mother, who's actually in recovery from surgery, and she's watching the show today. So she was excited, even though my mom is a Trumper and she's very strong on the right. She still was very excited to have you on because she says Dr. Cornel West, he's fair, and she loves to listen to you. However, there's a lot of...
I want to send my love to your precious mother, though, man. Mother's a very special... Her name is what?
Joan.
Sister Joan. Indeed, love you, Sister Joan. You did a good job with this brother here. I can tell you, absolutely.
You're making me blush, Dr. Cornel West. but let's talk about that, because there's a lot of people I speak to back east, a lot of my white conservative friends that I went to high school, they feel that this particular movement is not about inclusivity, but it's more about recognizing the racial disparities and the suffering of one race versus the other. Is it important, Dr. Cornel West, for white people to understand their privilege, or would the movement be better suited and get better results if we rallied around a common goal, say like imperialism or poverty?
Well, for me, my brother, I'm fundamentally committed to something that cuts across race, gender, sexual orientation, and national identity, and that's truth and justice. Just truth and justice. The condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. Suffering comes in a lot of different forms. It's true that Black suffering has been rendered invisible for decade after decade after decade. But we know justice applies to anybody who's suffering. It could be on the barrio, it could be white poor, it could be peasants in Brazil, it could be the working class in Peru, it could be sisters in China, whatever. And justice has to do with just treating people fairly, treating people decently, and having some kind of egalitarian ethic. So that when you look at a movement like Black Lives Matter, what you're getting is a focus on particular truths and justices that have been rendered invisible or violated in the history of the country. But you do have to have a broad enough vision so people can see that simply because you're focusing on a particular form of lies and crimes, which is the opposite of truth and justice, right? White supremacy is a particular lie that's tied to particular crimes. Male supremacy is another. Imperial subordination is another. Predatory capitalism, treating workers like their property or marginal utilities in some kind of equation, is another. But I believe in the primacy of the moral and the spiritual. So I always begin with morality, which is integrity, honesty, decency, concerned about truth, suffering of anybody, and then a spirituality, which really has to do with empathy and using one's imagination to get inside of the skin of other people, to walk a mile in their shoes. And see, that was the impact of Brother Floyd. You see, you had a lot of vanilla brothers and sisters, a lot of white brothers and sisters who looked at Brother Floyd and said, this is just so unjust, it's so barbaric, it's so vicious. I don't in any way want to be associated with that cold and callous white brother who could engage in that kind of vicious, barbaric action, that kind of public lynching. And so that was a crucial factor for this flowering and flourishing of people on the streets, not just of all colors, but after a while, it was disproportionately vanilla. It was largely white in a lot of different places. Why? Because the country is disproportionately vanilla. It's only 12.8% of black folk in the country. And you start having major demonstrations in South Dakota and North Dakota, that's not a chocolate affair.
Yeah.
You're going to have primarily white brothers and sisters out there, you see. So that part of the challenge, I think, though, brother, is how do we use the language of the quest for truth and justice in such a way that people can zero in on a particular form of injustice and others don't feel as if their suffering has no weight at all. See, that's what you don't want. That's the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker and so many others who we know in the history of this nation.
Yeah, I mean, when we're activists. I mean, that's where we come from. We actually go out in the streets and protest, whatnot, and march with everybody. But you know, it's the movement seems like it's a little different than it was years ago. I'm still out there looking.
That's true.
I'm looking for the next Fred Hampton, somebody to really bring it together.
Yeah,
but what are my responsibilities as a white man in the progressive movement? How should I approach things? Because it's very sensitive out there at times.
Well, it is very sensitive because, see, the dominant discourse these days tends to be one that focuses on white fragility, for example. It's a very popular book right now. So it has to do with, you know, white fears, insecurities, anxieties, white privilege, and one being concerned about one's white privilege. But you see, at the core of who we are the choices that we make. And the choices that we make have to be choices based on our sense of what we understand the truth to be, what we understand justice to be. So we don't have to ask for anybody's permission to be part of a movement concerned with truth and justice. Myself as a straight brother, I'm not going to ask my gay brothers and lesbian sisters and precious trans folk whether I have their permission to be part of their movement. I have to be humble enough to learn from their experiences because I don't know that much about it. But if they're being treated wrongly, I'm going to be there because it's a question of morality. And for me as a Christian, it's a matter of spirituality. You see, something that's wrong, you're going to fight it, no matter who it is. But when you then enter that movement, you enter with a sense of humility, recognizing that there's a whole lot of things that you haven't experienced, that you don't know about, that other people have experienced and know about. But you're there primarily to be a human being in solidarity with other human beings who are being treated wrongly and unfairly. See, that for me is the crucial level to cast it. That's not the way it's often cast because we're so polarized and we're so gangsterized these days that it's hard for us to even cross racial lines without all kinds of anxieties and insecurities being generated.
Yeah.
But in the end, you know, you want to be in solidarity. I'm not even crazy about the word ally. You know what I mean? I don't consider myself just an ally of indigenous peoples when I go to Standing Rock. I understand myself as trying to be a decent human being who's standing alongside other precious human beings who are being mistreated. And they're indigenous peoples. And I go in humbly, trying to learn from their situation, trying to learn from their insights, but I also have my own. You know, I bring something too. I have my own critical mind, you see. But it's solidarity, which is a much deeper notion than being allies in that way. You see, John Brown was not an ally in the Black freedom movement. The brother died for Black people. That's not an ally. That's a courageous human being who takes a stand in solidarity with other human beings who are suffering. He happens to be vanilla in their chocolate. Okay, fine.
Thank you, Doctor.
So you and I are both great admirers of Senator Bernie Sanders, but many of us felt let down when he dropped out and then endorsed Joe Biden, somebody who is diametrically opposed to everything he stands for. We just saw the Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden Unity Reform Commission come out, and among the missing items are Medicare for All, a Green New Deal, and defunding the police. So my question to you is, if progressives aren't getting anything from the Democratic establishment and from Joe Biden, what is the point in voting for a system that refuses to give us basic human rights?
Yeah, that's a fundamental question, my dear sister, and it's a tough one because I have a lot of close brothers and sisters and comrades who come down in different ways in response to that question. And I love and respect them. I just disagree with them in terms of a particular strategy at this moment. See, I think that we're right on the edge of this snuffing out of the democratic experiment called the USA. That the possibilities of fascism are escalating every day. I'm thoroughly convinced that Brother Donald Trump is a neo-fascist gangster. What I mean by that is he's a human being, but he has a disregard for the law. He thinks that he can say and do anything and get away with it. He's tied to big money. He's tied to big military. He poses as if he's a populist, but he's a pseudo-populist. But he has levels of venom and vitriol in his rhetoric that not just polarize the country, but generate intense animosity of different groups that could lead toward a state of emergency, calling a martial law. So that for me at the moment, I want to be first and foremost part of an anti-fascist coalition. I want to make sure that those who, for example, when I was in Charlottesville and I saw the neo-fascist brothers and sisters spitting at us and calling us names and so forth, and they calling out his name. You see, I said, ooh, good God Almighty. You see, they are emboldened. They haven't had this since Reagan, and they're growing every day. So you can't have a democratic experiment with that level of greed at the top, Wall Street, Pentagon, and at the same time, hatred on the ground. And so when Bernie came along, Bernie says, we're going to constitute a movement within the Democratic Party, as decrepit as that party is, as milquetoast as that party is, as neoliberal and centrist as that party is. We're going to have a movement in that party to try to overcome the neoliberal hegemony, the neoliberal elites who dominated. They're tied to Wall Street. They're also tied to the Pentagon and militarism and the expansion of the military budget. And you know, at the Nevada, it looked like we were winning.
Yeah.
And they all came together. Pelosi, Obama, Sister Amy, Brother Pete, Biden, the neoliberal unity took place because they said anybody but Bernie. Anybody but Bernie. But it looked like Brother Bernie was going to win. And we, you know, Bernie and I and all of us, we were breakdancing for a while. That brother, you know, he straight out of Brooklyn too. Just like my dear brother Pasta. And he got a little rich Jewish version of breakdancing. We breakdancing together, Black and Jewish together, you see, because it looked like we were on the way. Boom, overnight, crushed, you see. That neoliberal unity crushed. Now we come to the choice of, do we make it a priority as part of an anti-fascist coalition to make sure Trump is pushed out, even if you have to recognize that in voting for somebody like Biden, you're voting for somebody who's not your political friend. You're voting for somebody who's not your ideological friend. You're voting for somebody who's the architect of the biggest prison system in the history of the modern world, targeting poor people, disproportionately Black and brown. You're voting for somebody who bragged about supporting the invasion of Iraq, the invasion and occupation that led toward over 1 million precious Iraqis killed, and each life is precious. As a Christian, I believe, I don't care what nation you're from, what color you are, each life is precious, each life is priceless. So that, and of course, he unleashed Wall Street greed with the Glass-Steagall Act that he repealed and so forth. So that we don't want to lie about him. We want to be honest about him and say, this neoliberal disaster, which is what he is better than a neo-fascist catastrophe. And in that sense, if one pulls back and it looks as if our pulling back is responsible for fascism to flourish, that's a heavy responsibility. Now, I'm in a state like Massachusetts, so my vote doesn't make a big difference because, you know, Biden's going to win no matter what for the most part. So I could support the Green Party, your brother Nick's movement for a People's Party and so forth. I'm very open to third party formations. and look forward to probably being a part of them at some point. At this particular historical moment, my argument is that if you're in swing states, you may have to really close your eyes and close your nose and vote for the milquetoast neoliberal to make sure you push the neo-fascists out. But there are many who would argue,
Yeah.
support Brother Howard, Green Party.
Yeah.
I
And
can
just
understand where it comes from.
And Dr. West, I mean, just because a lot of people come back with, well, a lot of people fell asleep during the Obama administration, which led to Occupy, which then led progressives to wait for the next thing, which was Bernie Sanders and his movement.
That's right.
And then we saw the veil lifted off the Democratic Party through Hillary Clinton, because she was a warmonger, one of the most unpopular candidates of our time. And when she went against Trump and Trump won, that ignited this whole mass movement of anti-fascism, against authoritarianism, and it just unveiled all of the ugliness that lay in America for the longest time that we hadn't dealt with in racism, and people started getting out in the streets and fighting against Trump. Would we have had that? Because a lot of people say we wouldn't have had that with Hillary Clinton. We would have been at brunch. So the thing I worry about is a Joe Biden presidency sending people back to sleep. How do we avoid that?
Yes, and I don't think we have an adequate answer to that powerful question. We just don't know. But we can say this, that if any neoliberal candidate that is still tied to Wall Street greed, that is sucking so much of the resources of our democratic experiment, if we have neoliberal candidate like Biden still tied to the various forms of militarism and the imperial tentacles that are not just taking 53 cents out of every dollar that goes to military in our national budget, but also still drops bombs and drones on innocent people. You see, now if that still puts us to sleep, the question becomes, well, what kind of left do we have? Are we really that weak? Are we that feeble? Is it true that we have among our fellow citizens people who are willing to become so well adjusted to injustice under a liberal president that it's only when there's a right wing that somehow we can generate some motion? And I would say that, as you know, during the Obama years, it was just one of the low moments, one of the low points in the history of this nation was when you get a brilliant, poised, very sharp Black man who becomes the black face of the American empire, and hardly anybody wants to engage of a critique of them from the left. I mean, Fox News was going at it every day, right, because they got their right-wing critique, right? Yeah. But from the left, it was like we were just silent. We were put to sleep, right? I mean, he's assassinating U.S. citizens with no due process. That's authoritarianism. That's crypto-fascism. Yeah. I hate the Ku Klux Klan's deeds, but I don't think they ought to be assassinated without due process. These policemen who are out here killing these precious young brothers and sisters, they deserve a fair trial. They ought not to be assassinated. But we got presidents doing that with the killing list every Tuesday, and we could hardly get a critique out of the left because he's Black, or we don't want to alienate people of color, and they're very excited about it. No, where's the truth? Yeah. Where's justice? Where's integrity? Where's consistency? I call Bush a war criminal. He dropped 45 drones and killed innocent people. Brother Obama dropped 542 drones, and I call him a war criminal. They had to call me a traitor. You hate Obama. No, I hate his deeds. Yeah. I'm a Christian, I hate sinful deeds. I don't hate sinners. He's a human being like everybody else, and they deserve a certain kind of loving attention. But when you're involved in deeds like militaristic killing and imperial subordination and greed that takes money out of the mouths of children in terms of the cutback in various social programs, the cutback in food stamp, the cutback in Medicare, and so forth and so on, the cutbacks in Social Security, all of these taking place under the Obama-Biden years. Yep. Each and every one of them. 2011, here's a cut in Social Security. Here's a cut in Medicare. Where's the progressive critique of the neoliberal black president? Hardly there at all. And of course, in my own black community, good God Almighty, they call me everything but a child of God. And I kept a smile on my face. I said, I want y'all to know I'm loving you all like I love anybody else, not because I want you to love me back. I'm loving you because you're worthy of being loved.
Yeah.
And the love requires telling the truth.
Yeah.
That's a question of integrity. It's not popularity at all. And so one hopes that if indeed Biden wins, we ought to be stronger, more loud in our voices than ever.
Yeah.
Because he's got some ugly things coming. It's just that I think that, again, the neoliberalism, as vicious as it is not as barbaric in many ways. Barbaric in some ways, especially internationally, but it's not as barbaric as fascism, because under fascism, you just lose everything. We couldn't even have the show for the most part if we continue to go in the same neo-fascist directions that we're headed. You see, they would take all three of us to jail. We say hello to your mother, brother, and say, we love her, but we're going to jail together, even though, of course, you and I would be in the same cell because they got segregated cells.
You didn't make a good case for voting for Biden, just let me say that much at all and stuff. And in fact, I mean, I've supported Tulsi Gabbard. I always loved Bernie Sanders, 2016, and in 2020, I expected to get in the streets. And I think a lot of Tulsi people are going to vote for Trump over Biden, and some, Bernie's people will vote for Biden over Trump. But I can't argue that because at heart, I'm an anti-imperialist first. And we didn't mention that Joe Biden also has Ukraine with the regime change. We didn't mention Joe Biden's attitude towards Russia. We didn't mention Joe Biden's attitude towards China. So when a lot of people, I can't vote shame them for voting for Trump over Biden because they feel that he's going to be less of an imperialist than Biden. And I can't even argue that. I think they're both bad. Yeah. But what you just brought up, and furthermore, Dr. West, because I think if we do vote for Biden, we will be moving backwards. I mean, Malcolm X said at a speech in front of a bunch of voters that you voted for the Democratic Party because you're a chump. And then you yourself, we even have a video where you said, this is you kind of explaining the same sentiment or having the same sentiment years ago. Just listen real quick, Dr. Cornel West.
Yes.
What's your criticism of liberals in America and in their analysis of race in America?
Well, I think the problem often is that liberals at times tend to be spineless milquetoast, which is to say that they're not paternalistic. The degree to which they act on their convictions is often quite weak, and that they refuse to acknowledge the degree to which America remains so deeply shaped by corporate elites and bank elites in this country. That liberals think that somehow the distribution of wealth in place can provide the background conditions for inclusion of others, so that the pie would get bigger, so that economic growth by means of corporate priority can remain in place. And I think liberals are at times allies, at times they're unreliable allies, so I don't want to just whitewash them, as it were. But you've got to proceed quite cautiously with liberals.
Boy, they're not going to like to hear you say that. That brings me to...
Now, shortly after that speech, Dr. West, you were elected to the board.
30 years ago. You all really do your homework. That's beautiful.
We do our homework here at the Convo Couch. I think shortly after that speech, you were elected to the board of Zion, where you served for many years, and that was great. But here's my question, Dr. West.
On the Matrix.
Yeah, we love that.
We were watching that. We saw you. We're like, oh my God.
I'm like, y'all didn't know Dr. West was in the Matrix. He's on the board of Zion. Listen, after hearing that speech, after listening to Malcolm X, after seeing what we're seeing today, what took place in 2016 with the Democratic establishment, you witnessed it, what took place in 2020, hasn't the time passed for trusting the neoliberal establishment, better known as the Democratic Party? I mean, isn't it walking time, crushing this party now so something really progressive can be born in its place? Isn't that more important than defeating Trump right now?
If we had something in place, my brother, that was the reason why I went with Sister Jill Stein in 2016, because, Sister Tulsi was with us, with Brother Bernie in 2016.
Right.
We traveled many, many cities together. She was very, very strong. And I've always liked her critique of militarism. She's always been looking at the United States through the lens of what is doing in other parts of the world. That's a very, very important element she has in her vision that very few politicians actually have.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, though, we have to have something in place. You see, if we don't have strong party or pre-party organizations on the left, then we end up really being spectators in terms of the ways in which most Americans are proceeding who are participating in the system. We must never trust either the system or the neoliberals or the neo-fascists. And right now you've got neo-fascism, right wing of the ruling class, neoliberals, the other wing of the ruling class, and we don't have strong left-wing organizations. We don't have a strong left-wing infrastructure to fall back on. If we did, then what you just said would make much more sense to me. But we don't. You see, we live in a very conservative empire. We have to be very honest about that. You know, there's over 700 white supremacist militia groups in the United States. Over 700. You see, so that for every person, let's say like myself, kind of a left-wing, person, there's probably about 6 or 7 on the other side.
Yeah,
that's just what it is to live in America. That's just the way it is. We don't have a deep, multi-layered left-wing culture. We got a lot of decent people. You got a lot of wonderful individuals and so forth, but most of them are lukewarm in the middle. Then you got folk on the right who are on fire. Now, these folk willing to go to war. I mean, that's what we saw in Charlottesville. And Charlottesville now is just a stepping stone toward where they're headed. So we on the left have to recognize that, okay, given what we've got, and we've got some decent organizations and people, but nowhere near the strength as what you have on the right or in the center, how do you negotiate? How do you navigate in such a sick society?
Yeah.
Because that's really what you're talking about, you see. And by sickness, what I mean is too much indifference to the most vulnerable. Any society that has 40% of its population either living in poverty or near poverty, something's wrong with that society.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King called it a sick society because it's too much indifference to people suffering. The Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel used to say indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself, because you end up having ways of life where people turn their backs on people who are suffering. They could be elderly, fatherless, motherless, poor, indigenous peoples, working people, Black peoples, Asian peoples, Latinas, and so forth. You see, so that's something we just have to wrestle with living in the United States.
I would just argue, though, that the fact that we don't have that big progressive movement on the left is because we keep stepping back and defaulting into the Democratic Party. And that's why we can't build that movement until we finally say, you know what? No more. And if it takes 4 more years of Donald Trump for us to get our you-know-what together, then so be it. But we're not going to take that step back again and give power to people who just take our power and then turn a blind eye to us when it's time to go vote. So...
No, that's a crucial argument, though. And this is where I was telling you, I got comrades and brothers and sisters who make that argument, and I respect them for making that argument. The question then becomes, how do we define the time? I mean, I opted for that with Ralph Nader, over 20 years ago. I opted for that with Jill Stein 4 years ago. I opted with that. I've done that so many times. And it looks like each time we're unable to really build what we really want. That puts a priority on what you are concerned about. Because I can tell you this, it's a beautiful thing to talk with y'all, because it's very rare that I get a chance to talk with folk who make anti-imperialism a priority.
Yeah.
You all know Ajumu Baraka and the Black Alliance for Peace. They make anti-imperialism a priority. Yeah. Black Agenda Report. Brother Glenn Ford and Sister Margaret Kimberly and the others, they make it a priority. That's a rare thing, very rare thing, because most people don't even understand the United States as an empire. What are you talking about? Empire, the British Empire, the Roman Empire. Well, we've got a distinctive form of empire. That's why we got 800 military units around the world. That's why you got over 2.5 million soldiers all around the world, you see.
Yeah. Well, you taught us. Right there, winning the fight against imperialism right there.
Oh, you still got that book, my brother?
You know I got that book. My book.
That's kind of you, though, man. No, I tried to make the case. I tell you.
So over here, we've gone to a lot of the protests in LA. I just got back from Seattle. We were seeing what was going on there with the occupation or CHOP. But I'm starting to see the shift of conversation going from not just defunding the police to and Black Lives Matter movements, but also to how that money is going to be spent in the communities. The kids have started talking about capitalism, and they have started denouncing capitalism. So I'm seeing this shift in understanding how economics especially affects a lot of poor people, but also particularly Black and brown people as well. But I'm kind of waiting to see how we can take this movement and build it into a general strike, because I think it's happening already. But, you know, we're in a really precarious situation right now economically. We have a pandemic and we still haven't gotten health care for all. We still have a housing crisis. We still are seeing people that are in debt, especially the millennial generation. How do we take this movement and turn it into something like a general strike? Because I think it's already sort of happening, but how do we make sure we get in front of that?
No, you see there, you have to have very sharp, candid, courageous leadership with vision. There's a new journal on the way out called Boycott. It's run by one of my dear brothers, Brother Mordecai, and Brother Teff and others. I'm on the advisory board. And it's talking about how you use various boycotts that can build up to various kinds of strikes. All of those are forms of power to put pressure on the status quo, to let them know that our suffering is unfair and unjustified. You see, absolutely. But see, for me, you know, anytime you talk about defunding the police, you've got to start with defunding Pentagon.
Yeah.
You've got to start with defunding the Pentagon. See,
Right.
Both of the parties, again, neoliberals and neo-fascists, they vote for $750 billion. Pelosi and McConnell, they just dancing like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers when it comes to the support of the military budget. You see what I mean? And they act like they such foes and enemies. No, it's bipartisan all the way down, just like it was bipartisan in terms of the mass incarceration and so forth. So that if we're talking about defunding, let's start where the resources are at the highest levels of the empire. And what we mean is the reallocation of funds in such a way that we can get at the healthcare, jobs with a living wage, decent housing, quality education, those fundamental things that speak to people's needs. In addition to that, though, you note that there's already been a massive defunding of police when it comes to policing Wall Street.
Exactly.
Massive policing. The regulations weak as pre-sweetened Kool-Aid. You see, Wall Street does what it does. They look at the police and just laugh and push them aside. When it comes to policing businesses that are violating the rights of workers on the job in terms of their health, in terms of environmental issues and so forth. So that we have to look at the lens through which we view things. So that when people talk, oh my God, defunding the police, that's the worst thing. This is disorder. No, you've been policing. You've been defunding the police of corporate elites for the last 40 years. That's one reason why our trade unions are so weak. One reason why workers are afraid to organize. It's one reason why workers' productivity has gone up fourfold, and yet their wages go down. Yeah. That's what Wall Street greed is. And so when we talk about defunding police, you got to put it within this larger context. So it's not just a matter of people thinking, oh, there's not going to be any police around because they defunding it. No. This is public safety. This is ways in which resources are reallocated to take care of needs in addition to protection. But we're going to tighten up the policing of Wall Street. Billions and billions of taxes not paid. That's because the policing of them has been defunded.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that to me is very, very important perspective in terms of wrestling with where the movement is going at the moment. Same is true with these monuments. You see that it's just so quintessentially American in many ways to be obsessed with symbolic things and not want to get to the substantive thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with doing away with these monuments that are,
Right.
trying to honor white supremacists and other barbaric folk and so forth and so on. But to think that somehow this is a major concrete victory because you brought Andrew Jackson down off his horse and he's been dead for 170 something years.
Yeah, I know.
You say, hey, what's going on the ground? What's happening in terms of people's everyday lives? People get caught up with the symbolic too easily because it's the easy way out.
Yeah.
And so I'm not against the symbolic, but I'm very suspicious oftentimes of being too obsessed with the symbolic rather than the substantive.
Yeah. I always say, like, when that statue goes in the water, do we get Medicare for all? Or when that statue goes into the water, we take it down.
Right.
Does that end imperialism? I don't
That's
think so.
exactly right.
And I also want to point out, Dr. Cornel West, that when you talk about defunding the police, Wall
Just
Street,
Brother West.
I'm sorry, Brother West.
Yeah, there you go.
Please, thank you so much. My heart is I'm filled all warm and joy here. But, talking about what happened last week, how weak the Democratic Party is when it comes to imperialism, that it took a libertarian and Rand Paul to go and try to defund the AUMF. And this should have been an historic vote. They had a chance. Do you want to end the war? 20 years, up or down, let's vote. And they were so weak, nobody talked about it. It went by in the night. It really was a moment that we could seize. I was excited for it, and we failed, and we failed miserably on that situation.
You are so right, though, brother. You are so very right. That's why the voices that you all have, and those of Brother Juma Baraka and Glenn Ford and the others who are trying to keep track of the imperial tentacles and the motivation for imperial policies become very important. We have that battle right here at Harvard in terms of curriculum.
Yeah.
That each classroom I go in, I say, look, why are we not talking about an understanding of America as empire and democratic experiment, but a democratic experiment within the bowels of the empire? And the same is true when you talk about, well, the treatment of Africans and the enslavement of precious Africans was America's original sin. Nope, you're already on the wrong foot. On the wrong foot. No. The first one was treatment of indigenous peoples. Because if you look at white supremacy in terms of the European encounter with indigenous peoples, you understand America was an empire before it was a democratic experiment. It was a land, it was the resources. If you look at America only as having one original sin, which is black folk, and all we got to do is get that right, and our democracy is in good shape, and the empire is still restored. The empire is not contested. The empire is not called into question. You see? So you got to get the story right. And it takes us right back where we started with, what is the truth about America? What is the best of America? What is the worst of America? And if you keep track of the worst and the best, you'll discover there's a lot of folk who have been fighting against America as an empire for a long time, but their voices are drowned out. There's a lot of white brothers and sisters who have been fighting against white supremacy, but they're drowned out. There's men who have been in solidarity with fighting against male supremacy, but often drowned it out. There's Latino brothers and sisters who have been fundamental for the black struggle. There's black folk who have supported the Latino struggle. Those things are so easily pushed to the side because people, we need a more robust commitment to truth and justice. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. Dr. West, I think that the main mechanism, Brother West, my bad.
Brother
West.
Get it right.
I mean, I think doctor sounds cool too, though. Doctor.
No. I know you a free man. You a free brother. You use any language you want. I'm just saying you definitely open to use Brother West, because you definitely my brother, my dear sister, definitely my sister.
Definitely. Brother West, the main mechanism that allows for imperialism, that allows for systemic racism, that allows for income inequality, I think it all starts with election rigging. Now, I've been starting to look into Fannie Lou Hamer and seeing what she fought about. But you take away our freedom of choice, you take away our voice. you take away our democracy. And in its place comes that plutocracy we talk about in the imperialistic corporate state. Now, Brother Bernie Sanders, his greatest sin, in my opinion, and I love the man to death, was the fact that he didn't take this issue on head on. Our friend, Mark Ridley Thomas, he's one of the board of supervisors right here. I felt
that's right, Brother Mark.
Yes.
Brother.
And, you know, like the guy, but feel that he's been rather quiet when it comes to election integrity. Now, this is one of the most important issues out there, I feel. You know, we're election integrity activists. We go out there, we hunt down these elections, the whole process, how it's run, the open software versus the closed software, all that stuff that's going on, provisional ballots and the racist element behind that. What do we do to get these politicians, even the ones, including the ones that we like, to talk about one of the most desperate issues that's not on the table right now, and that's our voice, our vote?
Yes. Well, I mean, one is that thank God for Reverend Dr. William Barber and Reverend Liz Thea Harris, because their Poor People's Campaign is very much about voter integrity too.
Yeah.
They're focusing on voter suppression. Sister Stacey Abrams is talking about this same thing in Atlanta. These are very, very important issues. And I know that we all, you know, have our own distinctive, different kinds of loves of Mark Ridley Thomas. I take a bullet for that, brother. I've known him for 40 years. And I know he's deeply concerned about that issue, very much so. But I would argue this, my brother, and you tell me what you think. I think when you really get at the fundamental mechanisms of empire and imperialism, you're very much talking about the corporate priorities as a precondition for the way the American economy operates, because it's the corporations who are pushing the imperial policies in terms of their access to cheap labor, their access to cheap resources. And if they can somehow either convince the politicians not to raise the issues, or sometimes say, as donors and benefactors, we're not going to give you money if you raise this kind of issue, you see, then our politicians are beholden to those corporate priorities, which then overflow beyond our continental boundaries, and the connection then between corporate priorities abroad and the geopolitics of the empire in terms of trying to fight off other countries that are also trying to gain access to those resources, be it oil or what have you, or that cheap labor. So that the issue of voter integrity, crucial, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But we also have to have politicians that are willing to present a serious challenge to corporate priorities. One of the things that I love about Brother Bernie, and I've had many critiques of my dear brother in terms of pushing him on the Middle East, you know, the very ugly Israeli occupation of precious Palestinian brothers and sisters, and doing that in such a way we're not putting down our precious Jewish brothers and sisters at all. We're standing for truth. We're standing for justice. We would do exactly the same thing if there were a Palestinian occupation of Jews. We'd be in solidarity with our Jewish brothers. So we're against occupation. You could be in Kashmir, you can be in Tibet, you can be on the West Bank. It's a question of morality and spirituality. And Bernie did move on that issue, and I was glad to see him. But he was mainly focused on Wall Street greed and Wall Street domination. And that is so very important, because that gets at the heart of so much of the economy and why it is that we've got so much poverty and near poverty among our precious citizens. When 1% of the population owns 41% of the wealth, the top 3 individuals having wealth equivalent to the bottom 50%. You can't have a democracy for too long with that level of wealth inequality that he would hit over and over again.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. He didn't get a chance to talk about the voter integrity and the integrity of the electoral political system as much as one would like. I think you're right about that.
Yeah, I mean, because we talk about this corporate interest, but a lot of people don't know that our tabulation machines, I mean, this is a 21st century problem right now. You know, we have all the problems of the past still, but now we have corporately owned proprietary software in our tabulation machines, and I mean all of them. So, you know, with the flick of a switch, the elites can keep their power, and any progressive movement is then seized and halted simply because they're not going by the will of the people. Is there any particular reason why Bernie Sanders, who had the resources, who had these election integrity activists behind him saying, let's go. I mean, this is, I think he would have won if we counted the vote in 2016. Is there any reason why he slept on this?
Well, yeah, I can't answer that question, though. I really don't. I know that it was not a major priority in the campaign because I was with him, over 150 speeches, and I didn't hear too many references to that in the speeches. I know that he would stand against it. He did talk about voter suppression very much in South Carolina, because in South Carolina and North Carolina is just so massive that you have to say something about it. Right. But I don't think he said too much when he got to California, from what I can tell.
No. We tried to warn the campaign. Yeah. We were going to Jeff Weaver. We were going to Raphael Navarre.
Is that right? Really?
Oh, we have it documented. We're like, this is going to be a disaster.
It was a mess. I mean, he still won because of the work of the field organizers and the volunteers.
He should have won like this.
He should have won much higher. Joe Biden didn't campaign here at all. So it was very devastating type of primary, in my opinion. But
I'm sorry that I didn't get a chance to hear you all in that way, because I would have tried to convey that to him.
They shunned us.
They
shunned us.
When he won California, it looked like it was announced like a week or 2 weeks later.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And it didn't have the same weight and gravity, though, did it?
No.
And Biden, there's no way he got those votes. We started hunting down the mail-in situation, and we find out that the printing the ballots, outsourcing it to Seattle, to some rich kind of elitist kind of kid who's got roots, who's producing our mail-in ballots. I want an audit and go like, let's look in those mail-in ballots, because I don't know where Joe Biden's getting those votes from. He didn't even come when we met at the convention. He didn't even go to the convention.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, he didn't go.
This is all news to me. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot to keep track of too. But
the provisional thing, what they did to Latin people here in LA. It was a shame.
Poor people,
Dr. West. I mean, poor people. I mean, I have a theory that they really went after the working Latino vote by way of provisional ballots, by making them think that they can vote, and then throwing them away, because we went and saw the ballot counting for provisionals. We almost cried there were so many. And then the suppression in line, what they did in LA is the Bernie bro, the hipster who would vote on voting day, was just not going to wait 5 to 7 hours. So politically, it was very sinister what they did in LA, but they accomplished their goal.
Wow. Well, I tell you, thank God our Latino brothers and sisters came through for Brother Bernie strong. Yeah. See, one of the things that will be written about the history of the Bernie Sanders campaign is the first time in the history of the nation that the most progressive community in America did not support the most progressive candidate running for president, and that's the Black community. You see, you had neoliberal Black leadership that was pressing against Bernie. At the top, we had strong support of young Black folk, but those over 45, 50, all locked into the neoliberal legacy of Obama and company, they would not touch Bernie with a 10-foot pole. And it was clear that that they were shifting historically. See, one of the effects of the Obama presidency was that Black people became more pro-war than they've ever been. We've always been more anti-war. But all if Obama wants to do in Libya, if Obama's dropping bombs on Somalia and Afghanistan, it must be a positive thing, because he's Black and we Black. So all of a sudden, when it came to the anti-imperial sensibility, it started getting weaker and weaker because of the racial tie. And you see, the thing is, you got to have a moral and spiritual dimension. I don't care what color the person is. Because if we just go tribal, all of us got fascists in our communities: Italian, Peruvian, German, Russian. We all got gangsters in our communities, right? Yeah. But we got some decent folk too. So you got to make a moral discernment. You got to make a spiritual judgment as to who you're supporting. And so what happened was, Biden, all of a sudden, people are crazy about him because he was the vice president. What kind of argument is that?
Johnny?
Johnny Sue got something to say.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Brother John.
Brother West.
my dear brother, salute you, man.
It seems that no matter, who is president or how progressive a candidate we have, whether it's for Congress or the presidency, we still have to deal with the fact that the military-industrial complex and intelligence agencies like the CIA can dictate much more than a sitting POTUS, and that anyone who crosses them is usually ousted or eliminated, like JFK, MLK Jr., Malcolm X, Fred Hampton,
right.
Bobby Kennedy, just to name a few. How do we tackle such a powerful system if even our elected end up falling in line because it seems insurmountable?
Well, I'm telling you, you all got some powerful questions on this show. All three of you. But that has been the most difficult question for anybody who has a deep love for poor people and a love for working people. And when you love folk, you hate the fact they're being treated unjustly, and you got to do something. But the powers that be, in terms of both military, financial, corporate media, the educational system, all work together in such a way that they make it very difficult for people who are really concerned about poor and working people, really concerned about the least of these. You see in the 25th chapter of Matthew, what you do for the least of these, the prisoners, the children, the elderly, the fatherless, the motherless, the widow. And so anybody who is fundamentally committed to truth and justice in America better be ready for either character or literal assassination. That's just what it is to live in the country that we live in. When we got a long, long history of truth tellers whose character was assassinated, misconstrued, lied on, and so forth, marginalized, or were literally killed by bullets. And this is true right across the board. We live in a very violent civilization. The American empire itself begins with the frontier as this dominant myth. What is the frontier? It's supposed to be this line between the civilized and the savages, and you get psychic regeneration through violence by dominating the savages. So you go from 13 colonies to 48 and think you don't have an empire, even though you own somebody else's land. They call it manifest destiny. No, that's too deodorized. Let's keep it funky. Let's tell the truth. It's called imperial expansion.
Yep.
You see? And so that was by violence, the John Waynes and others. These are violent folk, cowboys killing these indigenous peoples, enslaving these Africans. The white working class men didn't even have a right to engage in collective bargaining until 1936. In Argentina, they had that right in 1836. Argentina is not a country known for being on the cutting edge of social justice. But they beat America 100 years in terms of their working class. Meaning what? Meaning that the power of those with huge amounts of property, the power of the ruling class, was such that it was overwhelming. When they organized in Ohio, Rockefeller had a private army bigger than the state army. And the workers here trying to get justice, they get crushed by both. Yep. So there's this sense of, do we have the spirit? Do we have the moral fortitude to bear witness even when it looks like we might not win? And are you willing to live and die even when it looks like your cause might not win? The great Norman Thomas used to always say, he's one of the great freedom fighters of the 20th century. The Vanilla brother, head of the Socialist Party for over 60 years. He used to be introduced as the head of the lost causes. You say, no, it's not a lost cause. It's a cause that we have not yet won. He said, I'm not supporting lost causes, but it looks like my chances at the moment don't look too good, because he was concerned with black and white farmers in the apartheid South. What are the possibilities of black and white farmers coming together under Jim Crow? Yeah. FDR didn't do a word. He supported Japanese when they were put in internment camps. Who supported the Japanese when they were put in camps? W.B. Du Bois, Norman Thomas, Helen Keller, very few others, because everybody's waving the flag. Yeah. They're not concerned about the rights and liberties. They're waving the flag. We got to do anything, no matter what, to win this war. Put them in camps, even though many of them are innocent. Well, you see, that's how you undermine your democracy.
Yeah.
So my answer to my question, though, brother, we got to keep fighting, but we always going against the grain. We got to be blues people. That's what the blues is all about. Good morning, heartache, Billie Holiday says. Every morning you got the heartache waiting for you, but you got a smile on your face. You got style, and style is not about technique. Style is about your vision, your orientation toward the world to connect with people who want to be decent, who want integrity, who want moral consistency.
And it's sad, though. Did you have something to say?
I just thank you.
Yeah.
No, but thank you, Brother Sue.
It's just sad that in this country right now, there's a lot of hyper partisanship. You know, the liberals are even in support symbolically of Black Lives Matter. The Republicans have, for the most part, been denouncing it, attacking the protesters. But how do we stop the co-option of the Democratic establishment? Because there's a lot of bad actors that are, you know, that have throughout history come into these movements and try to co-opt them. And we're seeing these white moderates, so to speak, who only wish to superficially support Black Lives Matter, but refuse to actually act on it.
Absolutely. Well, you see with the corporations, you know, they're concerned about their profits, they're concerned about their image. So when it looks like their image is going to be besmirched, they throw money. They're just throwing money. They're just throwing money. Black organizations, throw more money. Well, no, we're looking for a change inside of your own organization. We're looking for a change within the culture of your organization. Well, that's something we're concerned about too. But for the most part, we just want to throw this money out to pacify them and hope it passes by and fall right back into business as usual. And you end up with the class hierarchy, the imperial hierarchy still the same, trying to make it a little more colorful, but still not treating folk with the kind of respect they really deserve. And we just need voices that are honest. Voices that are fair. You know, if you got, everybody knows Fox News is a propaganda voice of neo-fascist Trump in the White House, but MSNBC was a propaganda voice under neoliberal President Obama. So that you got to tell MSNBC, get off your high horse. That's nothing but empty liberal self-righteousness. You didn't talk about the military. You didn't talk about the drones. You didn't talk about the connection of Obama and Biden to Wall Street. What makes you think somehow you're so progressive? They even call themselves left. That's a joke. They're not leftists at all. They're neoliberal, milquetoast centrists for the most part.
Yep.
And so you have to just be honest about that. And the same is true with criticizing ourselves. We need to be self-critical too. Too oftentimes on the left, we have an arrogance. We think that we so much better than everybody else. Somebody makes a choice that we disagree with. Somehow we just want to cancel them out. Something must be wrong with their hearts, minds, souls, and bodies. You think, get off the crack pipe. Every human being's got faults and foibles. You got to stay in contact with their humanity. And no matter how woke you are at the moment, you wasn't born woke.
Yep.
Everybody went through processes where they developed, where they grew, they matured, they expanded. So everybody don't have to be exactly where you are in order for you to stay in contact with their humanity. You want to be honest with them and tell them up front, oh, I disagree with you. Sometimes it can be in the family, sometimes it can be in the group, sometimes it can be in your community. But there are other things you can overlap with, you see. And let me say this, I know I'm going on and on, but let me say this. I think the greatest thing about the American empire is its music.
Yep.
You see, the music that has come out of this empire, you see, from blues and jazz and Frank Sinatra and Billie Holiday and Donny Hathaway and Luther Vandross and Bob Dylan and Carlos Santana, Stephen Sondheim. I mean, the music has been in some ways the model for ways in which we can connect at a human level and deal with the fact that we're going to die one day. Deal with the fact that all of us fall in sometimes out of love. You're going to have to deal with that catastrophe one way or another. And that music's going to speak to that. But see, that's at that deep human level. And so we got to catch up with a lot of our musicians, you see. Yeah. You get John Coltrane blowing Love Supreme. He's going to touch you in ways that you never realized. And then here come Tony Bennett singing with the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin. You listen to him to sing, how you stop the music, oh Lord, it's gonna touch you at a deep level. You say, ooh, even the American Empire and all of its barbarity has this rich sense of delicacy when it comes to the best of our musical tradition. That's why for me, the musicians are always the model. I think musicians are the real vanguard of the species.
Yep.
They're the ones who remind us of our humanity, of love and sorrow and sadness and joy, and the fact that we all will one day be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I think we have to also give credit to hip hop, because I remember being around for the birth of hip hop, you know, and a lot of my cousins, they were DJs for hip hop. So I got into the clubs, you know, where it was this multicultural thing that I've experienced for the first time in my life, you know, as we're going. And I'm talking about the old school hip hop. I know some of it has been taken over and kind of like, you know, corporatized and just bastardized and stuff. But hip hop, you know, when you hear Lil Wayne say that most of the people who buy his albums are poor white people, I see that also as a gateway continuing on from jazz and whatnot. And also, you know, sports. My dad went to Jackie Robinson's first game. He went to Jackie Robinson's first game. And my dad talked differently than my uncles that came from Brooklyn, who came from Bedford-Stuyvers, where they were fighting in the streets and stuff. And Jackie Robinson also was, you know, a stepping stone for me, and the way my father taught me, and why I am here today is because of Jackie. You know, Jackie was thrown out more than any player. They went out with spikes. He wasn't there just because of his talent. He was there because of his rhetoric, you know, and the way he handled things. He turned a blind eye to build bridges. So I want to give some love to hip hop, because I know Johnny's a big hip hop guy, and so am I. And sports, you know?
You are so right. You are so right. Because when I talk about the Black musical tradition, you know, beginning in '79 with Sugar Hill Gang, you're getting then the creation of a whole new art form that becomes the lingua franca, the universal language of the whole youth culture around the world.
Yeah.
But that's still that musical tradition coming out of the U.S. empire.
Mm-hmm.
And its best is critical of that empire with Chuck D and KRS-One and Rod Digger and some of the others.
You listen to these names, Johnny? African Bambaataa was big too back then.
Athletic, same way. I mean, Muhammad Ali, we can go on and on in terms of staying in contact with the humanity of persons who reach a level of excellence no one can deny.
Yeah.
Brother Kobe. We can go on and on in that regard. My hero is Willie Mays. I'm from Sacramento, so we had San Francisco Giants. Willie Mays had a humility and a level of unbelievable athletic excellence.
Yeah, yeah. Let me ask you another question, because I know I've quenched the thirst for some of the election integrity activists. They were dying for me to ask you a question. But then I have my anti-imperialist friends who want to talk a little bit more specifically about foreign policy. Now, we have a situation arising today. It's China. I thought as a progressive, our greatest enemy is poverty. Now, Xi Jinping in Beijing has brought millions of people out of poverty there in China. However,
yes, he has.
I get a big, you know, people hit back or push back against me because of their authoritarianism. In fact, one of our good friends, we're just in the middle of a fight, and I want to say hi to Melissa because, you know, I kind of touch a nerve with some people when we start talking about China, because people don't really know, and sometimes I'll throw out the terms, hey, you're reporting CIA talking points there, because it's not the whole story. It's not the whole story when you're talking about the Uyghurs. They're not in just prison because they're Muslim. There's extremism going on there, and that needs to be part of the story. Are the Chinese handling it right? Maybe not, but let's include that in the story. The Hong Kong Decency and Freedom Act. The NED is littered all over the advisory board, and that is CIA light. That regime change aficionados born in the Reagan era because they just wanted to do it legally, the legality now of regime change, rather than doing it the other way. How do we go about talking about China? Because I am very, very scared, not only of our rhetoric from the Democrats when it comes to Russia, but the Republicans, the way they are eyeing up war with China. It makes me nervous, Dr. West.
No, indeed. And you and your questioners and Sister Fiorella, is it
Fiorella.
Fiorella. Yes,
yeah.
Sister
Italian
Fiorella.
name, Peruvian girl.
Brother John. No, I got that rich, the Italian thing going. That the issue of different empires at the moment is very important. The Chinese empire is the most powerful empire alongside the U.S. empire. U.S. empire has over 800 military units around the world, 4,800 in the world. China's got about 30. So, I mean, it's not as if you got an equivalent at all. When you get inside of China, you have to be willing to tell the full truth. Now, part of that full truth is China is authoritarian. China does suppress dissenting voices. China does not allow for its workers to engage in wholesale collective bargaining the way any socialist society would. Now, those are just truths. Now, on the other hand, it's also true that the CIA could take those particular truths and paint China into an empire as if everything about it is evil. Well, no, they've also lifted hundreds of millions of folk out of poverty. There's no doubt about that. They've done much better with their poverty than we've done with ours in terms of the percentage of their population. Same is true with Cuba. I'd say the same thing about Cuba. Right. Same thing about Cuba. And I get in a lot of trouble with Cuba because Cuba's got magnificent healthcare, magnificent education. Mm-hmm. It's always been authoritarian. It has also suppressed dissident voices. It's also claimed that it's got beyond racism, when they still got some racist practices going on. Not as bad as the United States, but that's not a compliment. The United States got the lowest bar possible when it comes to treating Black people with dignity, right? So that you got to keep track of the best of Cuba. You got to keep track of the worst of Cuba. Same is true with the Chinese Empire, and same is true with the Russian. Russian also is authoritarian. Russian also suppresses its voices who are dissenting and so forth and so on. Same would be true with my Muslim brothers and sisters in China. There's no justification for camps, no matter what kind of so-called extremism is going on. You see, you have to be able to acknowledge the rights and liberties, the dignity of Muslims in China. We stand in solidarity with the people, with the Uyghurs.
Yes.
The Uyghurs in that regard, you see.
Yeah.
But now, see, with Russia, it's a little different because you see, Russia and the United States, it reveals the unbelievable hypocrisy of the United States. You see, for the United States to have bases in a country that has a boundary with Russia is like Russia having bases in Mexico. Yeah. If Russia had bases in Mexico, Mexico would hardly exist. We found that in Cuba in 1962.
Yep.
You see, the United States would not allow Russia to get within 1,000 miles of its border. And here Russia has to deal with nations that are right on its border, some of the nations it used to have within its empire, like the Ukraine. And Russia was promised that there would be no such bases, and the United States violated that promise. Now, that doesn't mean that Putin's not a gangster. We know he's a gangster. Yes, he is. No doubt about that. Doesn't mean Russia's not authoritarian. Of course it is. But every empire has to protect itself and those nations close to it in terms of it being attacked. So the United States is just so hypocritical when it comes to what they're doing to Russia to generate a Russian reaction. And if Russia did exactly the same thing to the United States, it wouldn't generate an abstract reaction. The United States would engage in attacks on Mexico the next day.
Yep.
And the Democrats and the Republicans would be marching under the same banner.
Mm-hmm.
They all agree on war.
They all line on empire.
That major agreement. The empires agree on war vis-a-vis their own interests, geopolitical and corporate.
So in covering these protests, we've seen how the mainstream media has turned the protesters into violent looters. They have framed the narrative as these protesters being the one destroying property, not being productive to their cause. In many cases, though, the people doing it weren't even really there to protest for Black lives or against police brutality, but simply taking advantage of it. But even if they were vandalizing as a form of protest, though, like we could study history and look at looting or vandalizing is a form of protest, then we shouldn't tell people necessarily how to riot. But how can we be violent? How can these protesters be violent when they're protesting the violence of the oppressor? It's kind of ironic because it became they're protesting police brutality, and then the mainstream media narrative became about how violent these protesters are being. And further, is revolutionary change even possible without violence? And that's a hefty question because we could all agree or disagree on that. But
yeah. Yeah, no, indeed, indeed. Well, I tell you, you all come ready though, don't you?
Oh yeah.
You all well
You're getting this
prepared, fortified for this
one.
dialogue. Well, one is
Pick one
that
from the chat.
one has to take a stand one way or another in terms of the issues of violence and so forth.
Yeah.
That as a revolutionary Christian, I don't agree with my dear brother Martin Luther King Jr. or my dear brother Desmond Tutu, who are absolute pacifists. I'm not an absolute pacifist at all. I believe in exploring all nonviolent options and alternatives. But when those alternatives are still unable to protect the vulnerable, then there's justification of certain kinds of violence and war. So I would have fought with Nelson Mandela against the apartheid regime. They explored every nonviolent possibility, and that regime still killed the precious black babies, men, women, and so forth. Same is true with Hitler.
Yeah.
Now here we got a Jim Crow army coming out of the U.S. empire, joining with the Soviet Union to push back this thug called Hitler trying to dominate the world. I would have fought against Hitler.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I'm pro Jim Crow. It just means at that time, that's the only army I could join in order to fight fascism. I am anti-fascist, but I'm also anti-imperialist.
Mm-hmm.
So there might be conditions in Peru where you explore every nonviolent alternative. I'm with my Peruvian brothers and sisters because this is the only option left, you see. Now, when it comes to rebellions and uprisings in the United States, I think the first thing to note is that the moral authority is very important here. See, that the United States, the history of looting of indigenous peoples and black peoples and working peoples, legalized looting, which still goes on this very moment. That Wall Street has been legalized, involved in legalized looting with billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars that they've had access to by means of criminality, insider trading, market manipulation, predatory lending, fraudulent activities. How many of them went to jail? Not one. So that looting takes place in a legalized mode, or it takes place in a quote unquote illegalized mode. Now, again, somebody like myself who takes the primacy of the moral and spiritual seriously, I don't believe that innocent people should be maimed or murdered. I don't care who they are. I don't care who they are. They could be Israeli in Tel Aviv who support a vicious Israeli occupation. I don't think that if they're not in the army, they should be attacked. They could be precious Palestinian women who are trying to work, write, go to school, raise their kids with families and so forth under a vicious Israeli occupation. They are killed. That's wrong. So there has to be some moral consistency here in terms of innocent folks. So even if a looter were to kill another innocent American citizen, I'm very critical of that. Now, if a looter attacks property, that's a different thing. That's a very different thing because I'm not crazy about it. I'm not promoting it at all, but it's not a person.
Yeah.
It's not a person. And for people to get much more upset with a brother or sister in the street trying to fight police murder and police brutality who throws a brick in a window, they get more upset with that than they do the policeman who killed a black brother or sister. See, something's wrong with that for me. Yeah. And so we have to understand the different forms of violence. There's institutionalized violence people have to deal with every day. There's structural violence. There's psychic violence that people have to deal with every day. You see, I'm against violence, but I'm not a pacifist because sometimes, given the world in which we live, given the kind of human beings that all of us are, the only response to violence in self-defense is violence. And same would be true. Martin Luther King Jr. had to deal with this question in terms of the self-defense of his house when he blew up his house in January 1956. And his wife said, well, Martin, I noticed you got a gun now, and I thought you were a pacifist. He said, yeah, but I'm trying to rethink this thing because they're trying to kill us. And I just want to defend us. Self-defense. Now, Coretta was more radical in her pacifism than Martin was. She said, no, I don't even believe in violence for self-defense. Martin said, well, I got to think that through. And he convinced her over time. I believe in violent self-defense. Yeah. He said, somebody messing with my loved one, it ain't going to be no kumbaya moment. No, not at all. But it's a very special set of circumstances for what people call just war, in which you can justify engaging in violence in that way.
Yeah. Dr. West, we're going to take one question from our audience because we had such a great audience today. But before I point that out, I just like to say that there's an artist out there that's been doing cartoon work of the independent media and the progressives out there, and they just recently did mine and Fiorella's picture, and look who I was right next to. Can you see that? Lord, I got so lucky. They put my picture right next to Dr. Cornel West. So when anybody sees Dr. Cornel West,
you're looking sharp there, brother.
Thank you. This is the moment that I told Mom I've arrived. I am next to brother Dr. Cornel West in a cartoon. Johnny, get the last question from the audience.
Right on.
All right, we don't have any questions from the audience, but I just like to say thank you, Dr. West, for taking my calls and coming on the show and doing this. You're a big inspiration to us over here, and I just want to say thank you. Go ahead, Fee.
Yeah, no, thank you. Especially during this time, we need a little bit of uplifting, a little bit of guidance. A lot of people are depressed. A lot of my activist brothers and sisters are just really feeling lost. Right. And they need a lot of guidance to stay positive and hopeful, because it has been a tumultuous and difficult time for a lot of people. So thank you.
It's true. Well, we all need each other. Yeah. But this is Fiorella, my dear brother, Big Pasta, and my brother, John, that we are in it together. And we're in it together like a jazz orchestra. Mm-hmm. The jazz orchestra is not about unanimity. It's about lifting your voice and antagonistic cooperation in such a way that it elevates the quality of the collective performance of our collective movement. So when we lift every voice, which is the anthem of Black people, lift every voice. When you lift every voice, it's not lifting an echo. We don't need no echoes. We got enough echo chambers and people just extensions of the echo chamber. You think for yourself, love for yourself, see for yourself. That's what it is to be human at the deepest level. And that's what democracy is all about. That's why democracy must be anti-imperialist, because we want every voice in Africa and Latin America and Asia and Europe and the Caribbean. We want those voices to be heard, and nobody raises their voice and chooses poverty. Nobody raises their voice and chooses incarceration. Nobody raises their voice and chooses no quality schools for their precious children. And when we see those conditions, you can rest be assured their voices are not heard. So we're right back to the music, right back to the athletic. Of course, we know how musical Michael Jordan actually was on that court, even given his politics that need a little challenging. We know how musical Kanye West is. He's a genius. His politics need to be challenged. But the art itself represents a democratic expression of everyday people being heard. And that's what it's about. And that's another reason why we go down swinging with style and smile. Because it's always a blessing to be in dialogue and be a part of the communion, not just the community, but the communion with each other, reveling in each other's humanity, even as we live in such a grim world and such a bleak moment in time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Cornel West, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you come back and do it again with us.
No, you just call. You let me know. Pasadena.
That's right.
Well, hey, listen, the Green Party's doing their nomination tomorrow. Maybe Jesse Ventura gets it, and you could support Jesse the way you supported Jill, the way you supported Ralph. Who knows? He's an anti-imperialist. There's still an outside chance.
I thought Howie was already the candidate.
They got to go through the convention, and we got to see what's going to happen. There are people who are saying there's still a chance. There's still people saying that Howie has it. And I like Howie, but a populist like Jesse Ventura to bring the voices up, an anti-imperialist. If he has Dr. Cornel West in his corner, whoo! Look out, Donald Trump and Joe Biden on that stage.
Well, we got to be anti-fascist though, in terms of even our strategies in that regard though. But but the important thing is we've got to be able to sustain ourselves and in our various organizations and structures on the left, whatever particular strategy we opt for. Yeah. That's the crucial thing.
I agree.
This election is going to come and go. We got to be fortified after November. Don't just stay woke, stay fortified. You stay woke, you're going to suffer from insomnia.
Gotta stay focused.
You got to stay fortified. Woke, get a little rest, fortified, keep moving,
Keep dancing.
On push.
Thank you so much.
All right, love y'all. Love you. Take it care.
For Pasta Jardula,
Fiorella.
Jonny Sue spinning on those 1s and 2s with Dr. Cornel West.
See you, Brother West. Convo out.
All right, my dear sister, my dear brother. Y'all stay